You've heard of high net worth, but we're talking about high net purpose. We want to find out how entrepreneurs, global leaders in our network are allocating financial, human, and intellectual capital in pursuit of purpose. But more importantly, we want to understand the compromises, the paradoxes in their approaches, pitch decks, and philosophies.
What if I told you the way you think about your abilities could be completely transformed? That your brain has the power to change at any age, unlocking confidence and resilience in ways you never imagined. In this episode, we are at Trinity College Dublin to meet Professor Ian Robertson. He's one of the world's leading neuroscientists and best-selling authors on how our brains can be rewired to build confidence, take control of our lives, and harness the winning effect. We explore what confidence really is, how it can be developed in children and adults, and why success is more about persistence and mindset than talent. We look at how gender affects confidence and how women are disadvantaged. For generational transfer, we talk about the risks and opportunities and how it relates to confidence building values and purpose. For leaders and entrepreneurs, this is a masterclass in harnessing your brain to drive success for yourself and your team. This is the Professor Ian Robertson episode. Professor Ian Robertson, welcome to High Net Purpose.
Hi there.
Delighted that we are here actually in Island Bridge in Dublin on the south side of the Liffey in the Trinity Boathouse.
You know, I've never been here before. It's the most beautiful place, but I've been in Trinity 25 years and I've never been here. That's terrible.
It's and they haven't touched this building since it was built, I think, because it's protected. Yeah. But it's a very nice space. So thank you to the members of the boathouse for letting us come here. So, Ian, have you got an articulation of your purpose?
My purpose is to get as many people as possible in the world to understand how much control they have over their own brains and mental processes. And once you have that sense of control, of that sense of you can change things in yourself, there's an awful lot that can happen in the external world that's difficult to happen if you feel imprisoned or if you're like the victim of genes or the early learning that constrains your abilities. The human brain is enormously plastic. That's its main characteristic. And that we don't harness that plasticity nearly enough in achieving what we want in life.
And the genesis of this purpose, did it come from your research for years in neuroscience or something earlier?
Well, I trained originally as a clinical psychologist. And so I had this kind of deep desire to, if you like, help people, like most people in the helping professions. But then, and so that was the kind of impulse, having, come from a relatively quite a poor background in Glasgow, there was this sense that you can make people's lives better. But then I got frustrated because I started to feel as if actually people were not able to change. And I kind of bought into what Carol Dweck, the great psychologist, calls the fixed mindset. I kind of believed that actually people's emotional states and their behavior patterns were largely under the control of variables that they couldn't control. And so I became a wee bit disillusioned with psychology's ability to produce changes. But then I came across the neuroscience research on plasticity showing that actually even late in life, even if with some degenerative conditions, the human brain always has some plasticity. So it can learn and it can change physically depending on that experience. And that revived my fascination with how we harness this to make people feel more in control over their own mental state.
And that control mechanism that we have starts in early life, genetic,
It's not genetic. It's very unlikely to be genetic. It's something you learn. Now, my parents were hugely lacking in self-confidence and very, very humble, very self-deprecating, very, not dominated by anxiety and not doing things that might pose some risk. And so as a result of that, they were, I was the opposite of helicopter parented. I became more dominant, if you like, or not dominant, but more. I was left to my own devices. I kind of called the shots much more than if I had more successful, confident parents. So sometimes confidence can be undermined if you're surrounded by too competent, confident people.
And generally for people though, the patterns that they have later in life most of the psychology and all the rest starts with this sort of early phases. What or you believe?
No, I don't really accept that because of the brain's plasticity. Because so much is about learning, and I became much more confident later in life. I wasn't that confident really as an adolescent particularly, but I became much more confident, and confidence comes from success, small successes, small achievements, via a mechanism called the winner effect. Small successes make it more likely you'll get subsequent successes, and that acts exponentially. And so confidence is something that can be learned to a significant degree.
What is confidence?
It's the belief you can do something, and the belief that if you do that thing, the outcome you want will happen. And it's domain specific. It's not a general purpose. I'm confident about everything. You can be confident about your financial judgment, but not about your social judgment, for example. You can be confident academically, but not in sport. You can be confident about your physical prowess, but not about your mental prowess. It's a set of beliefs about your ability to do things in a particular domain.
And you see that as a learned skill that you get from point by point, building, compounding it.
Yeah, if you take two 5-year-old girls, for example, with the same abilities, one of them was a tiny little bit more confidence than the other. That slightly more confident girl will be more likely to try out the new thing, to ask the question, to take that step. And that, in an literally exponential way, will steadily increase her achievements and her progress through life. So by the time these girls are 25, there'll be an enormous gap between the two of them, just because of that small, tiny difference in confidence.
So how do you build confidence? And some kids do seem naturally more confident than others, even though the same family, same household.
There is a certain genetic aspect to it, but like all genetic propensities, it depends how it interacts with the environment then, as the extent to which it's developed or not. So you can have a child who has that, if you like, genetic tendency towards being more dominant and more confident. But if that child has, for various reasons, doesn't have a number of success experiences, then that child, may well end up much less confident than someone who didn't have that genetic tendency.
So success experiences and building confidence, but then there's the sort of counter argument about kids today get, a medal for just turning up, and everyone gets a medal.
Yeah, because we're all economists and we all know the value of something. You know that if everyone gets a gold medal in the Olympics, suddenly there's mass devaluation of a gold medal.
Yeah.
And so people realize what the value of rewards are. And so if everyone gets a medal, if everyone is a winner, then you're not getting feedback about you're losing the link between effort and reward.
Yeah.
And once you lose that perception, that can undermine your motivational state.
So practically, how can you build confidence then in someone while at the same time giving them the resilience where they persevere through failure? Because that seems to be part of building confidence too, along with the success.
Well, you have to give them the opportunities to fail.
Yeah.
So you have to put them in situations where they have to take action where there's no guarantee of success. And then, because when they do that and they get a success, they'll get a big surge of reward in their brains that will make them feel good. Whereas if they do something that's very easy, or which they perceive as being the result of other people's efforts. So if you're a parent and you say, "Oh, I'm going to get my son into the best sports or school or whatever it is, the more the parent does, the risk is that the child then perceives whatever success he or she has as externally caused by the parent and not internally generated by him or her. So this is the notion of control, of locus of control, of feeling internally driven rather than externally controlled.
Okay, so can you just expand on that control point?
Yeah. Well, control is the belief that in agency, that there's things you can do that will alter what happens to you in the world, and the opposite of that is helplessness. Where after great trauma, some people develop what the great psychologist Martin Seligman called learned helplessness, where you lose the perception of the relationship between response and reward. And it seems that whether bad or good things happen to you are independent of your actions. And that loss of a perception of control of agency is hugely, hugely disabling. And it can happen not just in traumatic environments, it can happen in very rich environments as well, where rewards come independent of effort. Mm. And then you can get a kind of learned helplessness which is demotivating, lowers mood, increases anxiety. And so, people need to feel that what they do matters in terms of what happens to them.
So some of the work that you did and what you wrote in the stress test covers some of this area of the difference between chronic anxiety versus moderate levels of anxiety that could actually be a good thing.
Yeah. So it's very interesting that children and adolescents who have blessed childhoods and adolescence and early adulthood, they're maybe good-looking, popular, academically successful, sporting successful. They just have a blessed, happy first 20, 25 years. Paradoxically, they end up more emotionally vulnerable in young adulthood than children who have had some moderate levels of adversity. Severe adversity is as bad as no adversity, but I think absolutely no adversity in your childhood or adolescence leaves you emotionally vulnerable, because when you do experience finally anxiety or failure or humiliation or sense of loss of direction, when you feel that and all these emotions that go with these things in early adulthood, it can feel like something alien and strange that's hit you like a disease or an injury. And if you've never experienced it, it can be terrifying. So you end up being frightened of the fear and running away from it. Whereas if you've had some tough experiences as an adolescent or child, not too tough, but it's not all been hunky-dory for you, you know that anxiety and feeling down and feeling as if you failed, you know these things will pass. So it's like having vaccination, emotional vaccination.
But naturally, you want to help a young person if they're anxious and worried and stuff. So how do you get the right balance of protecting, looking after them, but at the same time giving them the space to go through what you've just described to build their resilience muscle?
Well, kids should learn, first of all, not to be frightened of anxiety, not to see it as a disease or something alien to be avoided. It's feeling down, sometimes feeling like a failure, feeling anxious are just normal parts of the human condition. And what's more, some aspects of anxiety are actually only become anxiety when you see them that way. So, for example, excitement and anxiety have exactly the same profile in the brain and mind, the same set of symptoms. They only become a particular emotion by the label you put on them. And so a great thing to tell kids is if they're feeling, say, I'm feeling very anxious or nervous about an exam, for instance, just say to them, look, actually, you say to yourself, I feel excited. Imagine, these symptoms are exactly the same as excitement. See them as excitement. And then what you You then see it as, can I do this thing in spite of my anxiety? Okay? And then doing something in spite of anxiety gives you a real success experience, because you've taken action in spite of adversity.
So that control and anxiety, we see that in business, professional sport, etc. As a mechanism that can be controlled for an extra level of performance rather than just managing.
Well, I mean, Tiger Woods says, the day doesn't feel nervous when he goes onto the green. This is the day he gives up. He needs, to get the optimal performance of an elite athlete, you need to have that state of arousal of the brain that we call anxiety, but which can equally well be called excitement. And that's when it depends on your mindset, whether you're seeing this as an opportunity to perform in spite of anxiety, that is a challenge, or as something fearful and to be avoided and retreated from, that is a threat.
Because you've written as well about overconfidence as well. Yeah. And I think you've even sort of linked it to people setting up businesses and startups, that it's sort of an expression of overconfidence given the riskiness, etc.
Yeah.
But it does seem like a good thing that, people will start something up and get going. But where does it become a red flag that, the leader thinks they can do more than they should, or they're narcissistic, or they've underevaluated risks, etc.?
Yeah, overconfidence is the more powerful something is, and the more able it is to do good things, the more able it is to do bad things also. Nuclear energy is incredibly powerful, can do incredibly good things, but it can also do incredibly bad things. So the more powerful any phenomenon is, the more greater its capacity for bad as well as good. And that's true of confidence. It is such a powerful state of the mind and brain. And we're all slightly overconfident, men more than women on average. And it gets us up in the morning. We overestimate our likelihood of winning. And that's why the whole worldwide gambling industry is based on this overconfidence. So that, the fact that we believe we're more likely to win or for our company to succeed than is statistically justified means that our mood is lifted, our motivation is higher, our anxiety is lower. We're more persuasive of other people and we're a wee bit smarter. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way. So overconfidence, healthy overconfidence is what humans, what's created civilization.
Yeah, it brought us out of the cave.
Yeah.
But how do we, in our day-to-day, manage to recognize someone who's dangerously overconfident versus that's actually a good level of confidence to deal with something that is a real challenge?
Yeah, it's very difficult because so powerful is the winner effect and so effective is confidence that it produces success. And success is, the greatest source of success is success, so it's exponential. And so it's very, once you've had a bit of success, your chances of becoming very successful later on are quite high with that early experience. Now, the risk there is that you attribute that success to special qualities in you.
Yeah.
And, very many very successful people beginning to feel a bit godlike. So John Paul Getty, for instance, thought he was a reincarnation of the Emperor Hadrian. He bought one of Caesar's villas on the coast near Italy. Caesar himself, Julius Caesar, had statues put up to himself when he was still alive. Vladimir Putin has a 50-foot statue to Saint Vladimir outside the Kremlin. Not to himself, but it's a bit of a coincidence, This primitive egotism, extreme egotism that we call narcissism. And the problem with that is that inflames the appetitive challenge, future-oriented approach behaviors of the brain, which are about focusing on future rewards, future goals. It narrows your attention towards these goals. It lifts your mood and makes you confident that you will get them. It makes you more active in doing that. That's all the positives. But then the correctives of the threat or avoidance parts of the brain, which is more in the right hemisphere, the risk perception, the self-awareness. Good, do I look like a real idiot saying this? Empathy, treating other people as objects, and then judgment. All of these things, if to the extent that you inflame the approach parts of the brain with great success, you then actually neurologically inhibit the parts of the brain that would allow you to be more modest, more humble, more self-aware, more empathic, more anxious about potential downsides. And that's what happens in a bear market. So you get in a bear market, you get mass activation of the threat systems of the brain. And then it can be quite difficult for the approach positive systems to rekindle, because these two systems in the brain are competing with each other and trying to inhibit each other.
So which systems are we talking about?
The approach system of the brain, the reward-seeking part of the brain, versus the punishment avoiding part of the system of the brain. That's all living creatures have this dilemma between going forward for the reward versus escaping from the punishment. And watch any bird feeding, and you'll see they're part of the time they're thinking, oh, that looks like a juicy insect, and they're focused on that. The other half of the time they're looking up at the sky, see is there a threat coming. So they oscillate between this anticipating reward and fearing punishment. And human beings are exactly the same. But we've created civilization, which makes the world a much safer place for us. So we've fostered this kind of tendency to slightly increase the approach avoidance parts and slightly decrease the avoidance part.
So circling right back then to the start where we're talking about the plasticity of the brain.
Yeah.
Individuals can manage to balance that approach and avoidance model in what they do, because I guess we have the sort of the short-term event, like someone playing a golf game or something else, versus the long-term where people sit.
Yeah, I mean these people learn how to balance these. Now, quite a number of people, and unfortunately increasing numbers of young people, find themselves dominated by the threat system of the brain. You're getting very high levels of anxiety in adolescents, particularly adolescent girls, but also boys, which have hugely increased. And
because?
The psychologist Jonathan Haidt says it's a lot to do with two things. One is a phone-based childhood, and the second thing is a lack of any experience of independent play. That everything is supervised by parents, everything is organized. They're never just out in the street hanging and doing stuff, so they don't get that opportunity to be agentic, to have control, to make decisions, some of which are bad, because of an overprotective environment.
And his work, is it anecdotal, or have they got...
No, it's a very significant research. I mean, it's not conclusive because it's mainly correlational, but there's no doubt about it. Children need to be mixing with other children in unsupervised by adults for part of their lives in order to learn some essential skills, in order to brush up, to have some adversity. A little bit. Maybe you have to know what it's like to meet a bully, and some elite performance. It seems to be really in part triggered by tough early experiences. So Tiger Woods, to go back to him, he had a terrible stutter when he was young, and he was bullied horribly. And that kind of gave him a hunger. Now you have to then combine that with success experiences, and he won an amateur tournament and saw some role models that he could aspire to. So that combination of opportunity, but also the fire in your belly that comes from having tough experiences, So we can't overprotect children, even though there are huge safety issues.
And so what other things can we do to move ourselves to the, the avoidance to the approach side?
Well, there's a number of things in how you can learn to do confidence. So what you pay attention to. If you're in giving a public lecture or giving a presentation, if you're anxious, your attention will focus on the people who are looking bored or annoyed or who are on the phones, and that will feed your anxiety. You can consciously learn to control your attention, to focus on the faces of people who are looking attentive or interested. And that in that way, that's a very simple little technique.
Yeah.
Because how you feel depends on what you pay attention to. Another is taking action. It's good. That's why goals are absolutely central to this. Setting goals for yourself and engineering small success experiences for yourself and taking action. The thing about anxiety is and this has been studies across 40 different countries in the world, anxious people do less of everything. They do less socially, they do less career-wise, they do less in work. Why? Because anxiety is about pulling back and avoiding potential risk. So you can just break through that and take small action in spite of the anxiety. That's a pretty critically important step out of being imprisoned, if you like, in that threat mindset.
And you write as well about your attitude to yourself. Yeah,
and that's where the Carol Dweck's kind of work on the mindset. We have to have a theory of ourselves that we're a learning neuroplastic being, that actually all of our mental states are potentially changeable by us. Now, here's the problem. If you deep down really believe that it's caused by your genes or your early experiences, and then you say, okay, I will try and change and do more or do X or do Y. Of course, we all know that learning something new, takes hundreds of repetitions, to learn a new skill, particularly one inside your own head. So the first time you hit a trough or a failure, you don't, it doesn't go well, and it feels as if you're not making any progress. If you, at the back of your mind, think this is really caused by things over which I've got no control, you'll give up. I used to think that about music. I would try to learn the guitar and try to learn the saxophone, and I always kind of gave up because I had a bad, practice session, and I just said, I'm just not musical, and that was nonsense. I didn't persist. But my mindset about, my theory of myself, my attitude to myself, undermined my ability to just persist through the ups and downs of slow learning. And that you have to be patient and persistent to relearn these habits to give you control over your own mental processes.
In your fantastic book, Confidence, I was fascinated as a father of 3 girls, how you extensively talk about how women are disadvantaged by how confidence works in the real world.
Yeah.
Could you help explain that?
Women, on average, are less comfortable with individual competitive competition than men. They're less likely to enter races that are competitive, for example, than men. And part of the reason for that, it appears, is that women's self-representation in their brain, when you look at brain imaging while they're thinking about themselves, their self-representation is much more linked to their relationships. So when they think about themselves, who they are, their selves, if you like, are embedded in relationships. This is in Western culture. Men, boys, when they think about themselves, it's much more isolated, much more independent of their relationships. So that makes it much easier for a boy or a man to compete. Because a woman is competing against herself, if you like. Mm-hmm. And it's very much harder for a woman to ruthlessly dominate someone else when, if you like, her self-representation includes these relationships, whereas for a man, it's much easier to ruthlessly dominate because their self-representation is is not tied up nearly so much with their relationships. So, and that means that they can compete more ruthlessly and get less anxiety from competing and from dominating and beating other people.
Do you think that will be a generational change that will bring that about, or there's something we can do to accelerate it, though?
Yeah, no. And the thing is, it's in countries with less inequality, with more acceptance of high-performing women, like the USA, you get significantly less disadvantage compared to, say, countries like Scotland, where there's a big, much bigger confidence gap between men and women, and particularly in working class men. And working class women in Scotland just have such a low level of confidence, compared to middle class women, say, in America. A huge gap.
Wow.
Yeah.
Confidence and happiness.
Yeah.
How are they linked?
Well, happiness, confidence is domain specific. So it's possible to be highly confident in your job and be unhappy. So it doesn't guarantee you happiness at all. That being said, achieving success in your life in domains significantly increases your chance of being happier. But happiness has two elements to it. One is hedonic and the other is eudaimonic. And the hedonic is the happiness you get when you get a pay rise or when you win the lottery. And that tends to be rather relatively short-lasting, whereas eudaimonic happiness is that sense of deep satisfaction you get from doing things where you feel there's a real purpose and you've achieved some direction towards your purpose.
And the control aspect as well. And I think you've written about this in terms of the socioeconomic as well.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt about it that the wealthier you are, the more control you feel you have. Money gives you a sense of control. And not having money, it depletes your sense of control. And control is, there's a very strong relationship between well-being, call it happiness, physical health, quality of life on the one hand, and your socioeconomic status on the other. And that's across countries and within countries. However, if you measure people's sense of agency, the sense of how much control they have over their lives, that relationship disappears. So it's possible to be poor but have a higher level of well-being than otherwise if you have a sense of control. And that can often come from your relationships and your networks and your sense of having some control over what's going on in your community.
Well, that's a really good link into my next question. And with my Island Bridge Capital hat on, where we do work with the development of the next generation, what are the risks in this large wealth transition that we're seeing at the moment?
Well, I'll just say I'm glad I don't have much money, because that would be a terrible burden for my children. The risk is that money will suck the meaning from their lives. And that sense of doing things, having agency, and doing things where it's me that's achieved this, rather than it's the money that's achieved this or the background that's achieved it. It's that sense of attribution of effort, attribution of the reward to the effort you've put into it. And the risk is in inheriting a lot of money is that you break that link between effort and reward.
But if the family are effective in seeing wealth just simply as a tool, what else is getting in the way that's making this transition fraught?
I mean, I think the evidence is that in people who have materialist values, money makes you unhappy. Makes you But it's possible to have a lot of money and not have material as values at the center of your values. And then money does not necessarily make you unhappy. As it says in the Bible, it's not money is the root of all evil, it's the love of money that's the root of all evil.
Okay.
So it's possible to be very, very wealthy, but for that accumulating and maintaining that wealth not to be your primary value. And if I'm guessing, I don't know, there's research showing this, I'm guessing, extrapolating, if you like, from what I know, that children who perceive in their parents that money is accumulation of money and the maintenance of it is not their primary value, that they're driven by other values. I'm guessing then that they will more likely take on board these values. In which case then, as you say, the money becomes a tool rather than a source of depletion of one's sense of agency.
You've spoken before about stealing the ladder, but have you actually stolen that from your wife? Where does that come from?
I never quite understood this fully, and I went and said, when I was writing the book, The Winner Effect, I said, what do you mean by this hiding the ladder? And she said, well, I've seen so many successful parents attribute their success to this special quality in themselves. It was the kind of godlike thing I was talking about earlier, but not necessarily godlike, but just to feel, I'm who I am just because of supreme talents and special abilities. And what that does, if that's the case, then the children looking up at this, well, I don't have them. It doesn't feel as if I have them. So there's no ladder up to where he is. It's usually a he. There's no ladder up there, so no point in me trying. Whereas, if all success is 90% luck, all success is 90% luck of birth, luck of opportunity, luck of timing, and then there's maybe 80%, and then there's 10% persisting through failure, persisting through setbacks, grit, if you like. That's, the talent bit of it. There's so many millions of people in the world with more talent than you have. The talent plays a part. It's probably an essential prerequisite, but it doesn't explain your particular success. And so that's where, just the humility of being honest with your children about, my God, I'm so lucky to be here. I'm so lucky. We're so lucky to have what we have. We are so lucky. And that's a very healthy message for children to get, that reduces the chance that they will feel cut off from anything remotely like the successes of their parents.
So putting this together, what could a setup for a successful family transition look like?
Well, I mean, the most successful one I've seen, and I've met some of his children, with Chuck Feeney, the great duty-free, billionaire who gave away $8 billion in his lifetime. And I've met his children, and they're very well balanced.
But just for some of our listeners who may not know Chuck's background.
Yeah. So Chuck was from New Jersey, and he in the Second World War, at the end of the Second World War, he found himself trading in duty-free with American servicemen in France. And he ended up setting up a huge international. He started off really duty-free in the world, particularly in Guam, and became a billionaire. And then one day, he decided he was going to give it all away. And he started giving it away completely anonymously. There was huge secrecy around all these donations for many years. And eventually he was only exposed for gross philanthropy in the New York Times. And now he did. His first wife did get a reasonable settlement, and his children benefited from that. But his children strike me as all being people who are in their own careers and motivated in their own careers, and kind of influenced by his values, hugely. And he himself, a very modest, quiet man, but very, very clever. Never said very much, but he just said it just made him feel so good. It was like a huge hit of pleasure.
But you knew him personally?
I knew him personally, and unfortunately he died last year. But we had a tribute to him in Trinity College in December, and it was very moving. And that's where his family were, and his wife, Helga, came to that. And she and he lived she still lives in a small apartment in San Francisco. They didn't have a car. Did the shopping in a local shop, it just, and he was very, very happy. And this huge kind of family of people around the world that he'd helped. Feel like I'm doing metaphorical family as well as real family. And he was hugely admired by Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and people like that. He kind of seeded the giving while living pledge.
Giving while living.
Yeah.
So pulling all that together. So you talked about setting out the values and understanding of your values can really help.
Yeah.
You also described about, and I guess it links to what you said at the start about the story about yourselves and your attitude to yourselves and how luck can play a part. And reminding ourselves of how lucky we are sometimes and where we've ended up.
Yeah.
So values, understanding ourselves, and then what about purpose?
Well, you see, values give you purpose, you see, that they should do. If one of the best things you could do for your children is to give them values. Here's why. There's something called self-affirmation technique developed by these brilliant psychologists in Rochester, Deci and Ryan, where you get people to do an exercise. What are your values? What really do you stand for? And then write a couple of lines of why you hold these values, what they mean to you. And then you subject people to ego-threatening messages, and ones that would make you feel anxious or humiliated or threatened in some way. And you find that the people who have done this self-affirmation exercise beforehand, the amygdala anxiety center of the brain shows much less activation. There's much more self-reflection going on in the middle of the frontal lobes. It makes people less defensive, more resilient to have affirmed their values. And here's why. Most people unconsciously fear death. Fear of mortality. It's called terror management theory is behind this. We have a terror, and a lot of the time our frantic activities of accumulation and accumulation of status or accumulation of wealth or working is a kind of fending off of this inkling of our mortality. And if that, to the extent that we're made aware of our mortality, we're more likely to cleave to our group, to spend money, all these. Whereas if you get people to affirm their values, the wonderful thing about values is they're eternal. Values are not time limited in the way that our egos and our bodies are. So to the extent that you're making people feel grounded in values, you're making them a little bit immortal. And you're taking away some of that background anxiety about mortality, if you like. And so in terms of anxious teenagers and anxious children or anxious young adults who may be lacking a sense of purpose, for them to feel here are my values and my purpose is to act out these values, it's a huge antidote to anxiety.
So there is empirical evidence that purpose can lead to better mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. It lengthens your life as well, a sense of purpose. It reduces your chances of dementia. Having a sense of purpose is probably the single most valuable thing that someone can have, other than being confident. Maybe the two together.
Put them together.
Yeah.
Ian, it's been a great conversation. I don't know whether the microphones have picked up the babbling water going across the weir outside, but it's been super to spend this time with you today. and hope we get to speak again soon.
Thank you very much indeed.
All content of High Net Purpose is provided as general information only. It does not constitute any advice, recommendation, or representations, and is not intended to influence listeners or users into making any specific investments or any other decisions. Please be aware that guests and presenters on High Net Purpose may have investments in any of the topics or products being discussed. Their reviews and opinions are their own and should not be taken as endorsements or financial advice. Before making financial decisions, we strongly recommend seeking advice from a qualified financial professional. This podcast may not be copied, reproduced, further distributed, or published in whole or part.